boyfriend at the time, and I would smoke weed, listen to music, and go on really long road trips. It was fun and kind of our thing. We were around 19 years old when this happened. Johnny, my ex, suggested going to see the Devil's Tree here in New Jersey. We have this website called weirdnj.com, and it has a list of haunted places to go see. We decided on the Devil's Tree as our nighttime destination. So we got everything we needed and headed out for the hour-and-a-half drive to some random town in the middle of nowhere. The ride there was fun. We were laughing, singing, and smoking. As we got to the town, we realized it was super desolate. It looked like a farming area. It was super foggy and about midnight when we arrived. We got out of the car and examined this eerie tree while reading about the urban legend behind it. The tree was terrifying. The silence was deafening. The tree was huge and had rope hanging on several branches. I started getting nervous because I wasn't familiar with the area and felt uneasy. I feel it's important to mention Johnny was not street smart. He was born into a lot of money, so his mindset was much different than mine. His dad took care of everything for him. I was much more mature and had a lot of struggle and experience in life. So we got back in the car and decided to find a spot to park so we could make out. I was a complete idiot. We were gonna roll a joint and mess around. We did this often, so we found a dirt road that was desolate and parked. This area was so creepy. I locked all the doors, being the paranoid person I am. As I was rolling the joint, we heard someone attempting to open John's door, followed by aggressive banging on his window. I literally jumped out of my skin. "Put the F-King light on," I screamed to my boyfriend. He did and cracked his window to see what the guy wanted. This guy was like 6'4" and was dressed in lumberjack attire. What the heck are you doing here? Get out of the car right now. Are you gonna FK her? You thought you guys were gonna FK on my property?" The guy yelled manically, holding John's window. John ignorantly smiled at him and replied, "We were looking at the Devil's Tree and parked here to set up the GPS to get home." "I'm sorry, man. Didn't know I was on your property. We will leave. We aren't getting out of the car." The guy leaned over to take a look at me. I started apologizing profusely. I honestly will never forget how terrified I was. I was hoping John would roll up the window and book it the hell out of there. Before we could even pull away, 2 pickup trucks filled with other lumberjack-type men pulled up. There were 4 guys sitting in the bed of the truck. I swear to God, it was like a horror movie. One guy from the truck shouted, "Do we have a problem?" to the big guy who was still standing by John's side of the car. He then said, "They were going to fuck on my property." "What were you going to do with the condom?" he asked, leaning in and focusing his attention on me. "You realize your boyfriend is digging your grave?" I was apologizing and being as polite as possible. I started crying my eyes out. I kept saying, "Leah, we weren't going to have sex. We're just trying to get out of here." I felt really uncomfortable. I was scared I was going to be raped and killed there. The guy then says, "Why are you on my property? Were you going to Yemen her, or just leave the condom on my property? I can kill you both and bury you, and no one would find you. You're so lucky your girlfriend has some sense. Get the FK out of here before I change my mind." I started having a panic attack. So, "John, let's F-king go!" I screamed loudly. John hit the gas and we started driving fast down the dirt road. It was pitch black, and as I said, we didn't know this area. As we were driving down the road, a lady came out of nowhere. John had his headlights on so we could see her. She had a gun and was trying to block us from leaving. I distinctly remember John saying, "I'll run her over if I have to." I was looking for a weapon in his car. He worked for his dad's construction company, so he had tools in the car. I grabbed a hammer from the back seat, and John literally drove towards the lady. She was screaming "shh" at us. "You're not leaving," she screamed. She lunged out of the way as we drove as fast as possible right at her. I remember looking back and seeing headlights from the trucks. John took an abrupt turn, ignoring the GPS that was navigating us back home. We got on the highway as fast as we could. We were filled with nervous adrenaline. I said to John, "We almost died. You can't be an ignorant jerk to people like that. You made it worse." John was like, "Fuck those guys, we are fine." When John was scared, he would smile and laugh, so I knew he was just as scared as I was. That's why the lumberjack was getting more mad, because of John's attitude and responses. We drove back scared and relieved to be away from them. That guy made me feel so uncomfortable, asking weird sexual questions and looking at me like he wanted to eat me. It must have been a family that lived on that property because the trucks pulled up so fast. We never went near that area again. We stopped going to weird New Jersey places. I still get chills thinking about it. I'm from Sweden, and until recently I helped run a small remote sheep farm. And without giving too many details to identify me, the farm I worked on reared sheep of a certain in-demand breed. Their wool is quite sought after, so even when the story occurred a few years back, the sheep were particularly valuable. The farm being quite remote meant we usually weren't bothered by people and could go about our business without much drama. What we weren't prepared for was a gang of organized criminals. They descended on our small family farm one day, looking to rob us of our livelihood. It's my family's farm and has been for many, many years. These days, I no longer live or work there, but back then I had grown up around the farm. I went off to college in Malmo and then came back and worked on the family farm for another 6 or so years until I eventually left. This incident occurred a few years before I left. The sheep were out grazing and I was on shepherd duty that day. Just me and one of the farm dogs, Bruno. It was quiet, an overcast afternoon with a bit of light rain drizzling down. Mostly, I was just kind of killing time, waiting to load the sheep onto the truck and move them to the other field. I was scrolling through my phone, checking out whatever I was into back then, and at one point I heard the sound of vehicles approaching. This was unusual. Nobody ever drove onto this part of the land except to help move the sheep. I was tucked under a tree, so I peered around and saw a truck pulling up to the gate. What was this? I thought. Nobody should have been coming onto this land like that. I crouched down and watched as a man exited the truck and opened the gate. The truck backed into the field and another man got out. Immediately I knew what was going on. Sheep rustlers. You hear warnings about this sort of thing, but it always sounds like something out of a movie. It's never supposed to happen to you. This is present-day Sweden, not Wild West Red Dead Redemption America. Unfortunately for me, though, it was happening, and quickly I grabbed Bruno's collar. I didn't want him to run out at the men and get himself hurt. Luckily, from where we were under the tree and in the bushes, we were pretty well hidden. The men hadn't seen us yet. They didn't appear to be looking around for a shepherd or anything. Normally, the sheep wouldn't be under constant watch, but that day, I just happened to be preparing to move them to another field. We only had around 10 sheep in this herd at the time, but like I said, they were valuable. Still, I never imagined anyone would try to steal them, and certainly not like this. Now, I was pretty far away, but I thought that I recognized the truck as belonging to a pair of guys from the nearby town, cousins or something like that. They had a reputation for being troublemakers, always up to one scheme or another, and it seemed like their latest scheme was simple: steal our sheep and then profit, I guess. One thing I was certain of, there was no way that I was letting these idiots take our livelihood. Honestly, it was mostly because I was protective of the sheep and worried the guys would actually hurt them. I figured I was far enough away to make a phone call without them hearing me. They'd left the truck engine idling, which helped mask the sound. I quickly called up the farmhouse, told my family what was happening, and asked them to call the police. Then I hung up, not wanting to risk making more noise. I was already worried about Bruno deciding to bark at the men, and at that point they were trying to catch one of the sheep. They didn't seem to have much of a plan, just chasing the sheep around trying to grab it. Maybe they only planned to steal one or two. Someone else might have just let it go, but not me. I wasn't letting a single sheep get harmed that day, and I honestly would fight them to the death if I had to. The problem was, I'm not some big, tough fighter type. I'm a fairly skinny guy, and I was pretty sure that I couldn't take one of them in a fight, let alone both. My only option was to convince them that I was more dangerous than they were. To do that, I had to stop worrying about Bruno getting hurt. I tied his leash around a low branch to keep him safely away from harm's way. I told Bruno to be a good boy and wait for me. Then I broke off another branch from the tree and made my move. I came charging out of the undergrowth, swinging the branch above my head, yelling every threat that I could think of, how I was going to effing kill them, how they'd wish their mothers never gave birth to them, all of this sort of crazy nonsense. And these cousins looked up pretty startled and clearly spooked by my oncoming charge. And that's when one of them reached into a waistband of his pants and pulled out a pistol. Of course, I just froze in absolute terror. I hadn't even considered the possibility that these idiots might actually have a gun. I stopped in my tracks a few meters away and let the branch fall from my hands. And the cousins, sort of just looked at each other almost like, what the fuck are you actually doing here? They clearly hadn't thought their master plan through and definitely weren't expecting me. Their incompetence didn't matter much, though, when they were armed. They still had a major terrifying upper hand here, and the one with the gun kept it trained on me while the other came over and patted me down. Thankfully, I'd left my phone hidden with Bruno, and I hadn't thought about it much. I just didn't want it to get broken, and I was beginning to realize that I hadn't thought about anything really much at all. I guess in that sense, me and the cousins weren't that different, really. And that thought sort of made me laugh in the moment. The cousin patting me down seemed unnerved by this and sort of stepped away. And we were at something of a stalemate. The gun-wielding cousin took control and roughly grabbed me, trying to force me to the ground. And that's when my survival instincts kicked in. Or maybe I lacked survival instincts. Either way, I charged the guy pointing the gun, who was so startled that he didn't react before I knocked him over, sending that gun bouncing across the ground. And that's when I realized that it actually felt suspiciously light. Was this idiot threatening me with some type of BB gun? Some type of toy? And I didn't have much time to think about it because then both cousins were on top of me, kicking, punching, flailing, and they were surprisingly bad at fighting for two actual criminals. Still, I'm pretty sure that they would have overpowered me if Bruno hadn't somehow pulled free and come charging across that field, barking and snarling like some maniac. That was too much for them, I guess. They abandoned that fight and ran back to the truck. The engine was still running, so they just peeled away, thankfully without hitting Bruno or any of the sheep. Those cousins were apprehended and questioned by the cops later that day. There were all sorts of legal complications, and the whole thing was a mess. In the aftermath, I beat myself up harder than those cousins ever did. I still suffered nightmares and PTSD from my decision to just charge them and actually risk getting shot, even if it was probably just some BB gun. Facing down that danger, even for just a moment, stayed with me for years and eventually led me to leaving the farm for a much calmer and much more chill profession. My girlfriend and I have been living together for years, and about 2 years ago we decided to move to a new rural house. The house is in a nice quiet suburb on a dead-end street with a huge property, at least 200 acres of farmland at the end of the street. We had met almost all of the locals and gotten along with them. About 3 months after moving in, my girlfriend decided it was time to make a long-term commitment and a huge decision without consulting my partner, and adopted us a 9-month-old dog. This dog was completely untrained. Luckily, we had a big backyard, and most of the neighbors had dogs too, so they understood that the training process, for example, constant barking, was a tough one. Aside from a few of my girlfriend's underwear going missing, which we assumed was the dog because, she likes jumping up and taking clothes from the line. Things were great. Anyway, back to the story. I work early mornings at 3:30 to 4:30 a.m. Sometimes I come home from work. One day, a week after adopting her, I came home to find our new untrained dog had escaped our yard and gone walkabout. I called my girlfriend and told her what happened. She just said that she'd be home soon. Meanwhile, I decided to continue walking around and ask the locals if they had seen her, which, to my pleasure, they had. Unfortunately for us, though, the last they saw of her, she was heading towards the huge farmland at the end of the street. I headed down to the end of the road to see if I could find her, but there's a giant fence in the way and a "trespassers will be shot" sign out front. Naturally, I feared the worst and decided not to enter. This is when my girlfriend got home and met me at the end of the road. She found out who owns that property and managed to get his number from another neighbor. She called him, and he told us to meet him out front of his house, which is right next to the property. This place looked completely unkempt. The fence was really rusty and broken down, and the bushes were overgrown and taking over. Before we could reach the door, I looked in the window and saw something really weird. Mannequins and mannequins everywhere, all wearing lingerie and covered in some red paint. I assumed paint, but you never know. So what the heck? We shared a glance at each other, and then he showed up out of nowhere. This middle-aged, sunburnt, full-on Aussie shouted at us that he'd seen the dog and to follow him, and he'd show us where it is. I really didn't want to follow him, but based on the story some neighbors had told us, he's completely willing and has, on more than one occasion, shot and nearly killed other people's dogs. So we followed. It's at this stage he started small talk with my girlfriend, asking how old she was and how long we had been at the house. All questions about her. Though the questions started to get quite personal, luckily our dog showed up. So we grabbed her and said thanks, and then pretty much got the hell out of there. After that, we decided to fix up our fences and forget about it. But a few days later, I got up at 2:30 a.m. For work, I proceeded to get ready for work, hopped in my car, and pulled out of the carport. Then I noticed a white car idling on the road outside of our house. That wouldn't usually be an issue for me, but this is a quiet road, and I know after 4 months here, no one is up at this time. I turned on my high beams only to find out that it's the same farmer from the property. As soon as he noticed me, he drove off. I called my work and told them I won't be coming in today because I'm not going to leave my girlfriend home alone. After that, I parked my car out front and I stayed up all night to make sure he doesn't come back. Same thing happened the next 2 mornings. Same car, same time, same sheet, but he always drives off as soon as I hop in my car and turn the lights on. After that, for a couple of days, nothing happened until Monday morning. I got up for work and he's back. At this stage, I've truly had enough of his. I locked up the house, hopped in my car, and high-beamed the hell out of him. He drove off like usual, but I dialed the police and I followed him just long enough to get his license plate number before he lost me doing 80 kilometers down our long, bumpy road. I passed all of his details on to the police: license plate, car description, and address. They told me to go home and that they would send someone over immediately. I went inside and woke up my girlfriend to tell her what happened and that some officers will be here soon. 10 minutes later, 4 squad cars showed up at our house. 2 went down the road and parked outside his house. 1 officer came in to question us further to make sure we're okay, and they both stayed until the sun came up. 1 left and the other stayed parked out front. Later that day, we got told that they caught the guy going 120 down the highway and searched his car and even found 2 knives, 1 pistol and 1 rifle in the cabin, along with photos of my girlfriend and a pair of her underwear. Needless to say, we were freaked out and we filed a restraining order for when he does get out of jail. In hindsight, I wasn't very smart in the situation. I know I should have called the cops a lot earlier on, but ST like this has never really happened to us before, so I kinda didn't think either of our lives were at risk. Big mistake. I've definitely learned my lesson. Growing up, I lived in a small farmhouse set on 2 acres. Although it wasn't a working farm, we did have an assortment of animals over the years. My mother was a vet and also spent a lot of spare time rehoming and caring for sick, abused, or neglected animals. It was a peaceful place with the happy hum of birdsong and wildlife to remind you that you weren't in a city. There was a walking trail through the wooded area behind our property. During the warmer months, tourists, hikers, and campers would frequently use it. I was a bookworm and used to spend a lot of time in our barn. It was set toward the back of the property along the fence line, and it was quiet. Tending to the animals and reading all my books in there took up a lot of time, so I would often hear people talking and laughing as they stomped along the trail. When I was 10 years old, I usually returned home from school about an hour before my mother finished work. I was a mature kid, and she knew that she could trust me to catch the bus home and start on my chores. This particular day, I hopped off the school bus, let myself in the front gate, and trudged up the dirt driveway to the house. While inside, I fixed myself an after-school snack, a good old-fashioned PB&J and a glass of milk. I took my snack with me out the back door and made my way toward the barn. I knew my afternoon routine like the back of my own hand. Right at that very second, our dogs should have been running up to greet me as they usually did, barking and circling around my legs, bums wiggling happily. On this day, I couldn't see them anywhere. I called for them. They didn't come, but I did hear muffled barking start up from the barn. That was really weird because we never locked them in the barn. During the day, they were outside, and at night, they would sleep inside with us. I put my snack down on top of the old tree stump nearby and went to open the barn to check on the dogs. The 3 of them rushed out and greeted me happily. They were fine. From the door, I quickly glanced around the interior of the barn. There was no one in there, quiet as usual. Maybe my mother had locked them in that morning for some reason. Or maybe the wind had blown the barn door shut and the dogs had been inside. I wasn't too concerned. I retrieved my snack and settled on a hay bale inside. The dogs sat at my feet as I shared little bits of my sandwich with them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a tall, skinny guy with long, messy gray hair walk straight by the entrance to the barn. I could hear him making strange babbling sounds. It sounded like he was talking in tongues, the way some people do when they go to church. Strangely, my dogs barely reacted. They looked back at the door, wagged their tails a couple of times, and focused straight back on my sandwich. This was not normal. My dogs would usually react to a stranger on the property. A tiny bit of fear nagged at my stomach, but not too much, because I was a kid and my dog seemed happy enough. I tiptoed to the doorway and peeked around it to get a better look at him. He was really tall and so skinny that his ribs and spine were quite visibly jutting out. His hair was a rat's nest, and so was his beard. He was now bent over our chicken coop, searching inside for eggs, I assumed. He pulled an egg out and ceased babbling as he studied it for the longest time. He said something to the egg that I couldn't hear, then put the whole thing in his mouth and chomped down on it. He was missing his front teeth, and the yellow yolk ran down his chin and neck from his misshapen mouth. I could see him grinding his jaw to crunch on the shell. I wanted to vomit or scream or both, but I was frozen watching as he devoured a raw egg, shell, and all. When I snapped out of it, I screamed so loud that the man turned his head to look at me. He didn't react. He kept on eating, teeth grinding, yolk flowing, staring intensely. I bolted from the barn, across the soggy green lawn, up the back wooden steps and into the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. My heart was beating wildly against my rib cage. I was terrified for my dogs, feeling guilty for leaving them out there with this guy. I pulled the corner of the little white curtain back from the window on the door and peeked out to see if my dogs were okay. The weird man was just standing there in the middle of the yard, staring intensely at the back door as my dogs licked bits of raw egg from his fingertips. I started shaking like really bad at this point. He was friendly with my dogs. They didn't see him as a threat. I was not safe. I needed to call for help. As I went for the phone, I could hear him begin to babble loudly again. With shaking fingers, I dialed my mother's work number. The babbling was getting closer and louder. I trembled harder and harder. I could barely speak when my mother answered, but I managed to choke out that I needed help, and there was a man on the property. She told me to go upstairs, lock myself in my bedroom, and hide under the bed until either herself or a police officer came to get me. She promptly hung up on me and called the police. And the man was stomping up the back steps now, babbling nonstop, and began to bash on the door. I bolted upstairs to my bedroom, locked the door as directed, and wriggled under the bed. I made sure not even a toe was poking out as I lay there hoping that I wouldn't die. It would be school holidays in a few weeks, and I didn't want to be dead for that. The weird guy made his way around the outside of the house. I could hear him bashing on windows, babbling through noises of frustration, and screaming unintelligible phrases at what I assumed was me. This guy wanted in, and I was just waiting for the shattering of a glass window or the kicking in of the back door. Fear does strange things to your memory. I don't even know how long I was hiding and listening to him for. It didn't feel like too long, though, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving. I could hear them talking to the guy and asking him questions. He didn't respond to their questions, but the babbling sound seemed panicked and louder. I decided to creep downstairs and look through the window, feeling safer now. I could see my mother running down our dirt driveway. She looked panicked as she burst into the house to get to me. She wouldn't stop hugging and kissing me as the police questioned me, and it was embarrassing. The backup they called for arrived, and the police took the guy with them to the station. Before they left, they assured my mother that they would be in touch to let her know what would happen from here. She seemed pretty intent on pressing charges. A week later, the same two police officers came back to our house. They explained that the guy on our property had been secretly living in our barn at night and hiding in the woods during the day for a couple of months. Many people had seen him on the trail during summer as they walked it. He was homeless and usually harmless. That explained why the dogs weren't worried about him being on the property. He had befriended them. He had mental disorders and a history of being in and out of the hospital. He had gone off his medication and experienced a mental break while hiding out on our property. They explained that the guy had started to hide in our barn only when the weather had started getting cooler, as he had nowhere else to go. His elderly mother had died a few years earlier, and he had no caretaker to look out for him. He was a sick man just trying to survive. This story ends 27 years later at his funeral. The man, whom we will call Jim, got the help he needed with the support of my mother. He went back on his medication and disability pension. My mother helped to find him a small place in town and made the security payment on it so he could rent it. Jim became a volunteer on our property, helping my mother and me tend to the animals, and eventually he got a few paid hours a week at the vet clinic, helping to clean and maintain the site. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Jim was a sick man, and sometimes he could have episodes, but for the most part, the last half of his life turned out to be pretty good. He gained friends in town, support from his community, a job and a home, and people who were always around to look out for him. We buried our friend Jim last week. For someone who started out scaring the shot out of us and who had nothing and no one in his life, he made a lasting impact on all of us, especially the animals that he loved so much. Sometimes you think you'd never want to encounter a creepy person again, and most of the time, you're probably right in feeling that way. But Jim deserved a second chance. He wasn't a malicious person. He just needed a helping hand back to normalcy. It was a Sunday early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog. Her name is Molly. She's a mutt, but she's not a tiny dog by any means. At that time, I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in a forest that was nearby. The day started off like any other. Me and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I immediately got out of the car and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her, since I'd smell like her for the rest of the day. I put her leash on and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk. He always thought that we would just go down a road and back, but I always found it more interesting to take her to the forest. I always felt a certain kind of peace and relaxation there that was unmatched by anything else, so we took a turn and headed to the forest. Usually when we got there, I'd take her leash off so she could explore on her own. Most of the time, I'd carve my name into the trees or look for anything interesting. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, presumably from an old table, and then I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't usual when we were in the forest. I thought it was a fox or some other animal, so I quickly grabbed the wooden leg like a weapon. I knew that if it was a fox, I wouldn't attack it, but I had a sense of security while I was holding it. I called out, "Molly! Molly!" but she just kept barking. This was very strange for me, since she always came to me when I called her. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene I'll never forget. There was a man, probably in his late 50s, half naked, carrying a large machete in one hand and holding moonshine in the other. This was the first time that I stumbled across someone in the woods, let alone someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly and hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now, I have no idea how I would handle it. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked in confusion. I don't think I understood the seriousness of the situation at the time. He turned around, revealing his face. He had some of the clearest blue eyes I've ever seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were open wide. "Come here, boy. Look what I've dug up." I was afraid that if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me. And that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got closer but kept a good distance. I didn't see anything except for an empty hole. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to get my dog and started walking away slowly as to not notify him that I was leaving. But then I took one final glance at the man. His head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept looking. I know, how stupid of me. He finally got up from the ground. I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, if it even did belong to an animal. I had seen enough and started sprinting with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing, and then I saw something flying from the corner of my eye. It was that damn machete. I heard him yell, "Damn it!" This made me run even faster. I know the forest very well, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I ripped through branches and bushes until I got out of that forest, but I didn't stop sprinting till I arrived at the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid that he'd get angry and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. Needless to say, I never went to that forest alone ever again.